global supply chain, no 2 days are ever the same. I go into this every single day with my fireman's coat on, ready to put out fires. My consumers and customers are calling every day. Where do we go? Do we pivot? Do we stay the same? Like, what do we do? There's a lot of planning and strategic forecasting that comes into making sure that you still can operate in the current environment. I consider myself to be a supply chain optimist. I have a belief that we're going to figure it out. Yeah, this huge issue happened, this disruption happened, but guess what? We're in a world of possibilities. We put people on the moon. We do amazing things every single day.
This is the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast, where we are here to educate, equip, and inspire people to build extraordinary companies. We're so glad you're here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can get updates every time we drop a new episode. Now, let's get it started. Hey, guys, we are back at it at the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast. My name is Rick Meekins, and I'm going to be your host today. And in the studio, we have Kerim Kfuri. How are you today, sir?
Doing very, very well. Thank you so much for having me, Rick. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Guys, this is going to be a great show. Kareem has done some amazing things over the past, X number of years. And I think that you're going to get a lot out of it. But you know what? Before we get started, I would love it if you haven't already, if you'd subscribe, hit the bell so you get updates every time we drop a new episode. So without further ado, Kareem, would you mind letting our audience know, giving them a little bit of a download on what they can expect in this episode?
Sure. Well, my name is Kerim Kfuri, and I'm the president and CEO of a company called the Atlas Network. I guess what we're really going to talk about today is the world at large, globalization, trade, the realm of supply chain, why it's important, how it's kind of become a more common term these days and what's kicked that off and how it touches our lives every single day. That's really my business, the area that I really operate within and have for a few decades now. And my hope more than anything else is to really be able to bring a certain level of knowledge and a relatable voice to this pretty complicated but extremely important industry that touches our lives every day. So that's my hope with our podcast today, that we can be able to get into some of these things and talk about it. And I can use my experience and my background to discuss these things.
Awesome. This is going to be a great show. Thank you so much. So let's do this. Let's get into a little bit of your background, where you've come from and what you've done.
Sure. So, like I said, my name's Kerim Kfuri. I'm the president and CEO of a company called the Atlas Network, which is a global supply chain solutions company. What that means is we basically work with businesses of all different sizes and entrepreneurs to make ideas into reality. So that's not that easy of a task. You have different companies or entrepreneurs that come in different parts of the life cycle. They could just have an idea on a napkin and have no idea where to go, or they could be operating for decades and decades and have major disruptions in their supply chain and are trying to figure out a new supplier or a new routing, a new way to basically cost engineer their existing products. So it's really that wide of a territory as far as what we do as a company. Before I came to this and having my own company, I worked in the corporate world. I worked in some regulatory capacities in the financial space. I was at the Securities and Exchange Commission in the Office of International Affairs. I was at NASD FINRA and ran a lot of Sarbanes-Oxley and sort of controls and risk mitigation type of functions.
Mm-hmm.
And then previous to that, I was in a couple of other industries as well in the realm of business and consulting and technology. So, that's very different than what I do today. But the reality of it is it's all connected. All of those lessons learned in the regulatory space is what we apply to make sure that we get great outcomes and processes around our supply chain process for our customers. So although a different industry, the methodologies and the ideas around risk mitigation and visibility and transparency all are connected. My background's in consulting obviously is very important in dealing with clients and working with, within different industries and fields. And then obviously the realm of technology too comes about, because who isn't using technology today in a million different ways, right? From the time we wake up to the time that we go to bed. So it all has come together for me in a bit of a perfect storm, not in any kind of way that could have been planned. Like most entrepreneurs, you sort of just take a bit of a roundabout way to finally land on what it is. You do a lot of things you like, a lot of things you don't like. You try things, you succeed, you fail. And in the end, it comes together. And that's really what's happened for me and my company in the past more than 20 years, the Atlas Network, and being where I am today in the realm of global supply chain.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. It's that journey that I think that we all love, and you really encapsulate it. I know for me, I've moved around a bunch of times just in terms of focus, and you get all this input from places that you never expected to get it from. That's awesome. You've got some heavy stuff on your plate with the new administration and tariffs, and talk to us about that. What's going on?
Well, the reality of it is that, in global supply chain, no 2 days are ever the same. And, I go into this every single day with my fireman's coat on, ready to put out fires and pivot and change and adapt. And I wrote a book about this, which is called Supply Chain Ups and Downs, which talks about the fact that you have these controllable factors and you have these uncontrollable factors. But regardless of it all, you still got to get those products made, delivered, shipped, routed, whether we're talking about a pandemic or a force majeure, natural disasters, or a new, political environment. And that's really what we're talking about today. In some way, we've had a lot of changes and a lot of shifts with the new administration that's come in, for good or bad, however you want to kind of cut it, slice it, or look at it. But regardless, it's impacting global supply chain. It's impacting American consumers, buying behaviors, trending towards the worst case outcomes potentially of recession, inflation, recession, and so forth, or maybe some really great outcomes may come about of it as well. So we're definitely in a unique environment. And in the last few weeks since we've talked, obviously, we're officially have significant tariffs with our largest trading partner ever, which is China. We've
Hmm.
got, nearshoring neighbors such as Canada and Mexico, where we've got, a little bit of some tumultuous relationships there. And how does that sort of impact things like agricultural products or oil or energy things, lumber, building materials, and so forth
Yeah.
from nations like Canada. And we're all just trying to figure it all out. How far do we sort of take it before we feel the pain of it? How far do we take it before other opportunities, either within our own country or in other parts of the world, open up to us, whether it may be Africa or India or the Caribbean or other places? So it's a really, really unique time that's filled with challenges and equally opportunities. And we all are just trying to figure out how to navigate this. My consumers, obviously, and customers are calling every day. What are we going to do here? How are we going to handle these costs? How are we going to handle these increases? Where do we go? Do we pivot? Do we stay the same? Like, what do we do? And
Yeah.
there's a lot of planning and strategic forecasting that comes into making sure that you still can operate in the current environment.
Yeah, yeah. That's really what was coming to mind for me. I mean, how do you plan? I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, this is what I want to do in 3 to 5 years, but I mean, you've got so much volatility, in your space.
Yeah, you
You
can
know,
never really be fully disruption proof. That's for sure.
for sure.
And when you're dealing in the global economy and in global sourcing and supply chain, you always have to have a certain level of tumultuousness when it comes to whether the delivery timeframes, the cost structures, the environment, like I said, between nations. These are all things that people and businesses have to just assume are risks of doing business. Some industries really won't be as impacted, and other industries will be much more impacted. Like, take, for example, the luxury goods space. Okay. If there's an additional tariff and the costs have risen a bit, that luxury manufacturer may not make 200% margin. They make 190% margin or 180% margin, or they may just pass the incremental cost directly off to their consumer who's not really price sensitive anyway, because they're basically willing to pay for a brand and so forth. You also have scenarios where different brands who may have been sort of like underselling their identity or the quality of their products have to now upscale. They have to take better pictures and videos and showcase their services in better lights to command a higher price point. So that's that. But then there are industries where the margins are razor thin. And in those places, it's going to be complicated because they can only cut so much. Tariffs are an extraordinary cost. it has to be passed off to the consumer because it cannot be absorbed by the business given just the nature of materials or their infrastructure or otherwise. And consumers are going to end up paying more. So, your guacamole may be 5 times more expensive, or whatever product we're talking about, whether it's agricultural or commoditized product, may
Uh-huh.
be more costly because the infrastructure cannot be done otherwise. The margins are too thin. Those materials or those products pretty much only come from like one or two major regions in the world that are under sort of the tariff scope. And
Right.
so it's just holistically the entire industry bands together and is like, well, if it's just going to be more expensive, it's just going to be more expensive. And everybody sort of just deals with that. So it really just depends again on industry products to see how to plan, and even if planning is required or not required.
Give me an example. I mean, like what would a change look like, within your company? We've got, thinner margins, we still have to move product, et cetera, et cetera. So what would change look like?
Well, I mean, we have always been a company that is no stranger to pivoting, and our solutions for our customers are always the ones that are the most economically efficient and best quality outcomes. So if that's Asia today, that's Asia. If that's America, it's America. If it's Mexico, it's Mexico. We've always been geographically agnostic.
Mhm.
It's more about really the delivery life cycle and how to achieve it. But in our business, what I would tell you is the following. So many of our clients are so vested in their supply chains, and there is enough kind of flexibility on the side of the suppliers or on the side of the business or on the side of us as being service providers that we're
Uh-huh.
all just kind of like figuring it out without rocking the boat too much. So it's really coming down to a matter of kind of costing and figuring that out. We don't really have too many clients where the margins are so razor thin that additional tariffs or costs can't be accommodated, figured out, or understood. But we've definitely had to have very frank conversations with our clients and with our supplier networks to say, hey, listen, if we don't want to lose this business, if we don't want to lose these clients, or you don't want to lose the efficiency of this supply chain, everybody is going to have to sort of bend a bit. And for a period of time that's a bit non determined,
Uh-huh.
because we know right now that even some of the tariffs that were put in kind of Trump 1.0 still exist today. So
Yeah.
are the tariffs of today more permanent or long term, or will they be something that will change in the next few years and revert back under a different administration and so forth, in the idea of kind of opening it back up to levels of more globalized trade?
Yeah. How frequently do you go back and kind of make these micro adjustments or pivots or yeah.
The awareness of micro adjustments and pivots is daily. I mean, that's for sure. But we're not making moves every day. But the awareness of it is definitely a daily thing,
Yeah.
because in a day, you could have things change overnight. You could have, dock workers strike. Now, this port in California, you really can't bring shipments through there because it's going to be completely disrupted. So let's move to another place. Or you may have the wildfires happening in California that may impact the way that people are able to work or operate around the ports and things of that nature. You may have something happening in a war or oil or gas crisis or things of that nature. So your awareness of these things must be, very immediate. But how it plays out and how you strategize around it then kind of gets done in a matter of days or weeks or months, dependent upon what really is the what really is kind of the fluctuation point. I mean, the pandemic, perfect example. I mean, we all had to sort of figure out a way to kind of get things from point A to point B when nothing was able to get from point A to point B, or there weren't even workers to help that to happen.
Yeah.
And that was definitely an exercise in creativity and efficiency and pivoting and trying to kind of figure out a way, and sometimes a very expensive way, to keep
Right.
businesses in business.
Oh, and while you were talking about that, I was thinking about the bridge went down, in the Baltimore Harbor.
And I'm
You saw that on the news.
from Baltimore, so I know all about that.
So, I mean, what was that like? I mean, I imagine you saw it on the news, and then what happened?
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a disaster there, a mishap, and what ends up happening? Well, people have to then reroute, right? They have to reroute their ships, they have to reroute the goods to other ports.
Hmm.
It's kind of similar to the same idea with the Panama Canal, right? Or when any of those kind of bottleneck or junction zones get impacted. Everybody has to now figure out a way to get around it and move around it and how to figure it out both in the short term and the long term. And that was exactly the same kind of process here, that we had a bit of a mishap there. And in doing so, it impacted trade for a little bit because people couldn't get through the waterway there because of that challenge. But we see those all the time. Like I said, Panama Canal is a perfect example.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. How do customers deal with that? I mean, it's like, is it kind of like it is what it is? Is it like, okay, we're going to have extraordinary costs because of this? I mean, do they think in terms of
That's a
these things
matter.
happening or?
Well, I mean, no one has a crystal ball,
For
and this
sure.
is all about communication. You have to be able to actively communicate to your consumers, your customers, your business partners when disruptions happen.
Uh-huh.
And if possible, if you have enough sort of like heads up about it, then you have to preemptively communicate about it to say, hey, you know what? We think that this is going to be happening. We believe that because this is happening at this part of the world or otherwise, that this may impact your ability to get the goods when you need them, your pricing, this, that, and the other. As long as it's communicated, then people can then build into their forecasts disruptions and
Yeah.
slowdowns. It's when people don't say anything that it ends up being a major challenge. If I told you now, here we are sitting in March, if I told you, hey, you know what, we're going to have some disruptions that could impact your December deliveries because of A, B, C, and D. You've got, 6, 7 months, however many months until the end of the year to basically be able to make those decisions that may alter, or you may not present a particular product or SKU or service to the industry because you may think you may not even have it. Or how do you come up with plan B, C, D, and E to accommodate that challenge? But it's because you have the runway to do so. The problem is that the problem in supply chain consistently is many customers or businesses assume that 101st production is going to be like the 100 that were previous to it. And that's not the case. You
Yeah.
need to assume that every production is the first time. You need to assume that there will always be those foreseeable and unforeseeable ups and downs and challenges that you're going to deal with,
Mhm.
and be ready to pivot when and if those things happen, especially if you don't own the factory, especially if you don't own those shipping and logistics lines. So when you don't own the supply chain itself, the entire mechanism, that
Uh-huh.
any one of those things could basically cause you levels of disruption. You have to be prepared for it. A
Yeah.
shipping, a logistics thing, a materials thing, a production thing, a global pandemic thing, any of those things.
Yeah.
So, you can see how it's it's a lot of connecting dots.
Wow, 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 wow. What comes to mind, I think about one of the things I talked about like during the pandemic was the idea that, entrepreneurs started out as entrepreneurs, and it's like this type of thinking is like, how do I serve my market? How do I bring my good and service to market? You've been doing this for 20 years, 20 plus years. Do you see that particular skill set coming into what you're doing now with these challenges that you have to face?
Absolutely. I mean, you have to have a problem solving mindset for sure. And in this industry, you have to have a limitless mindset. You have to have a mindset that does not see boundaries or borders or challenges, because if so, it's kind of like that egg that cracks because you've got a very thin shell. You can't operate as an entrepreneur generally, I don't think, or in this industry for sure, and not be able to sort of let things roll off your back, be able to pivot very quickly and not get too hung up on things. They're important and you have to understand what they are, but you need to have an optimistic feeling about it. So I consider myself to be a supply chain optimist in the fact that I have a belief and a thought that we're going to figure it out. Like, we're going to figure it out. Yeah, this huge issue happened, this disruption happened, but guess what? We're in a world of possibilities. We put people on the moon. We do amazing things every single day. So we're going to figure out how to get that from A to B. We're going to figure out how to modify that cost structure, or maybe cost engineer this thing, or come to some level of a resolution. Why? Because we're problem solvers, and to every problem there can be a solution. It's just a matter of digging deep into it and really looking at how to solve it. And so I'm very much an optimist when it comes to this business.
Yeah. It sounds like, and you're still learning, as new situations present
Absolutely.
themselves. I mean,
Always.
yeah.
Always. Always. And in business and in life in general, you have to be a perpetual student. That's the beauty of this, experience that we have here. We're
Mhm.
consistently learning from each other. And that's why I love this industry, because I'm consistently learning through the cultural exchange with these other nations and places that I'm working within and my company is working within. I'm consistently learning through adaptations due to new technologies, new sustainability practices, the conditions of just we as human beings, how we're changing and how we're communicating differently with each other as well. So it's a fun game in that way. That doesn't the word game doesn't mean that it's not serious. It just means that the exciting part of it, or what really kind of propels you forward, is that idea that you're consistently morphing and changing and learning. I think it's when we stop doing that we become irrelevant. And when we stop doing that, we also start to regress, mentally, maybe physically and otherwise. We don't really propel forward when we just kind of sit still and don't really look to advance and grow. It doesn't mean that you don't need to be introspective. It doesn't mean that
Mm.
you don't have to sit still sometimes to reflect upon what's the next best decision to take, because
Right.
you do have to build in moments for reflection, especially as an entrepreneur. When you're your main cheerleader every day, you need to think about why you're doing what you're doing. But it always has to be with an idea of forward momentum.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, definitely. How did you get started? Like, what gave you, I mean, this is when I think about what you do, and think about, the global footprint that you have. I mean, how did you start?
Starts really young, starts really, really early. And I think for me, was a mixture of, experiences and background and so on. I mean, my parents are immigrants. They came over from Lebanon in the middle of the Civil War. And so you immediately have this idea that, you're going to try to make something and you're going to try to grow yourself and build yourself. And they were coming from a scenario where they were, living under warfare and bombs and sniper fire and things of that nature that we never think about here. But then they were still living their lives every day. So you already are in this mindset of okay, nothing really is that big of a deal because it's life and death type of scenarios. My father also was a physician in OBGYN. And so I gained a lot of sense of work ethic from him, because 2, 3, 4 in the morning, he'd run to the hospital to be delivering babies, and that was like not a big deal. If I saw him 20 or 30% of my life, he was doing it for his family, and that's just the way it is. And so I developed some work ethic and ideologies around that from him. Grew up speaking many languages. I spoke Arabic, French, and English, my whole life, in that house, and that gave me that kind of global mindset. Traveled, was on my first plane at probably like 6 months old. So really was building this idea of being a traveler and an international person, and being able to have this work ethic, these combinations. And then I had some people in my family that were very entrepreneurial. I had an uncle of mine who was very entrepreneurial, and I think that planted a seed for me at an early age. And one of the first things I think I did was probably 6 or 7 years old. We had a bunch of blueberry bushes in the Baltimore area where I lived.
Mm.
And, I would just pick them all and just, sell them on the side of the road in front of the
Mhm.
house, just like a lemonade stand idea. But this was blueberries.
Mhm.
It went well. People loved it. I saw there was a need and a product and a service, and let's try and do it. And, later on in life, I did a lot of other things. I had little businesses in the mall, and, started a .com during the .com age, and did that
Mm.
for a bit. And then obviously did a lot of corporate experiences, but always had that sort of international entrepreneurial with a very strong work ethic thing happening. And I think that that translates to who I am today and what I do today.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. I was thinking, with all those ventures, one of the challenges that we go through, as entrepreneurs, is like stuff doesn't always go as planned. I mean, I know you talked a lot about supply chain in general, but I mean, were there ventures that you attempted that you know were very, very difficult that you maybe pushed through or maybe didn't push through?
Too many, and that's exactly where you learn the most. That is where you learn the most. I think the big one for me for that was my dot com that I had created. I was in the music industry for a little bit, and I've always been a musician. And
Mhm,
so, somewhere along the road, this was 1997 to 99, let's say, the dot com space was exploding. Anybody who essentially was doing something XYZ.com was,
mhm,
going for an IPO and trying to, be on the markets and whatever it was. And so I created a business to business for the music industry because it was a very fragmented space
mhm,
where it accommodated the needs of artists and clubs and venues and music industry professionals like lawyers or publicists, PR people, and even commerce. So things like eBay, like I need to sell like a music instrument. Here's a place where I can go and so on.
mhm,
And it was a great experience. It took probably a year and a half to build the whole platform, and I hired a team and put in good money into it. And when it was all sort of said and done, and everybody was like, "All right, we're gonna try to take this to the mountaintop and do something really special with it," the whole internet space imploded. Dot bomb, right? 2000, 99, 2000. And that was a big kick in the gut because you had spent a year and a half, 2 years, you had raised some money, put in your own money, countless nights working hard, staff, team, this, that, and the other. And it just imploded because the whole space just, collapsed in so many ways, based upon these ideas of, we're just going to build these sites and everybody's going to pay for advertising dollars. And
mhm,
it just wasn't like that in the time. So that was definitely a big setback at
mhm,
that time. But I looked at it, and those experiences of first time management of teams, technology, understanding consumer behaviors, marketing, dealing with failure, all of those things, life lessons, things that
mhm,
you absolutely use every single day, can look back on fondly, well, maybe not so fondly, but look back on and draw from it. I mean, these are these arrows that are in your quiver that you got to pull out, and you pull them out in times that you don't even think of. You're in that client meeting. Oh my God, that thing I did 20 years ago is important now, you know?
yeah.
So I look at it in that way. It's not really failure. It's just lessons that you learn.
Yeah, definitely, definitely blessings. What was the most difficult emotional challenge you came back from, and how did you do it? How'd you crawl your way back?
Emotional challenge. I mean, I think one of the largest emotional challenges for me was not putting my daily fulfillment as a priority. And this is when I was in the corporate world. I had a
Mhm,
particular corporate experience, which will rename, stay unnamed because it was great in so many ways. But the reality of it is it was one of those sort of like soul sucking type of jobs where you're reporting every day, you're not connected to the work, you're not connected to the teams, and the only thing that's really keeping you there is a paycheck. And through time you are just diminishing more and more and more. You're giving away your best years, your best time to something that you really just are not connected to or care that much about. It has value, it has experiences to it, and this, that, and the other. But generally, it's not right. But you don't leave because it's comfortable, or you don't leave because of whatever circumstances may be holding you there. That's an
mhm,
emotional toll. And it happens on a daily basis. And you either, at that moment, I think many people, depending upon who they are, have a choice. And the choice is that I'm just going to consider that this is what I'm here for and this is what I'm going to do.
mhm,
Or it's time for me to kind of get up and get moving. And, I think it took a little bit too long for me to make that decision, but I was really happy I did. I did it at the urging of my wife actually at the time, who was like, "You know what? You're just not a happy person
yeah,
anymore." and you're miserable and you're not going to get any better here. I haven't seen you smile in a while. So like, why don't you get the hell out of there and start doing something that you really want to do? And, there's those challenges there. So I think that that would be the emotional thing for me where, due to either societal norms or responsibilities or otherwise, we tend to sometimes prioritize all of that over, yourself. You can't be of service to others if you can't be of service to yourself. So it's one of these situations where you really got to know what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You mentioned your wife. Do you have anybody else in your support circle, people perhaps you network with or friends and that sort of thing that kind of, I don't know, in a way go through that journey with you or can relate with you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do. I mean, I've got family that I talk to, not always about a lot of entrepreneurial things because they're not necessarily entrepreneurial people. But I'll get the perspective of my teenage son now and again to be like, what's
Nice.
going on? What's hot? Tell me what's happening. Just because dad's not cool. So why don't you kind of tell me what the kids are all talking about? And that's a good thing to do to get those kinds of fresh perspectives. And then obviously a whole ton of like, business people and mentors and folks you've gone along the way with, and then just friends you've had for a lifetime that you grew up with that it's not about necessarily learning or sharing the journey, but it's just about talking about what's going on in your life.
Yeah.
Part of that may be work, and a lot of it may be other things that are going on. And we got to have those people, those sounding boards, to really be able to help us keep in perspective these decisions that we're taking and going through every single day, whether it's personal or professional.
Wow, wow. I'm curious, what is it like? I think you might have a different perspective, but I mean, what is it like to, go from, I don't know, a domestic business to, something that is international, to something that is, touching every continent?
I think for some people that would be hard, really hard.
Mhm.
And that's okay, but for me, it wasn't. Because of the fact, as I said, I sort of grew up in an international household and an international perspective. It wasn't strange for me to see different cultures or get on airplanes or do things. But there are many business owners or people who don't leave their town,
Yeah,
never been on an airplane, don't speak any other languages, don't maybe even want to or don't know why they should, let's say. And my opinion on that is we are students of each other and we're students of the world. And so the more you have a global mindset, the more you're able to unlock opportunities for growth and development that you yourself don't even realize exist.
yeah,
And that happens with just being tolerant and being open minded to having discussions with different people and from different walks of life
yeah,
and realizing the when in Rome idea, and really grabbing that with both arms. I mean, one of the things that I absolutely can't stand is when, you know, people from the US specifically, I mean, it's other countries too, but let's say the US, travel to some other nation and expect everybody to speak English or expect everybody to do what would be expected in the Western, world or in the United States. That's wrong. You have to go with the intention of what am I going to learn from where I'm going to
mhm,
and let me try to connect by learning a few words of that language of the country I'm going to.
yeah,
Try to basically operate in their environment because the perspective you gain is something completely immeasurable. So I really think that that's super important when it comes to like international business and working with other cultures and cross border and all that stuff.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That was one thing that when I was in the military, that was one thing they were really, really insistent on. We learn about where we're going,
Absolutely.
so that we're not so disruptive. And it was wonderful, really, because we got invited into people's homes, in certain circumstances, and even though we didn't speak the language, everybody eats.
Sure. Everybody's got to put their pants with one leg on at a time. And
Exactly.
outside of that, if you did say a few words in the language, the doors of hospitality open up that much wider. Oh my God, you're
Absolutely.
trying. Everyone had laughs a little bit at the way you said it. Okay, cool. But like you're trying and so on. And I had that experience in college actually. I had gone to Spain to visit a
Mhm.
friend of mine, didn't
Cool.
speak any Spanish at all. Then I took a course in Spanish. It was the summertime. I decided, hey, let me just take a little Spanish course just because I'd just been there. It was fascinating. And I
Mhm,
went back again to Spain for another trip, only
mhm.
4 or 5 months later, two completely different trips. And the only difference between it was the fact that I knew a little bit of some language and was slightly conversant and understood a bit, but two completely different trips. The first trip, I felt like I was sort of just like a stranded foreigner who didn't really know where and how and what. And the
Right.
second trip, it was like, oh, come on over here. Let me show you these things. And let me kind of open up those doors of hospitality that I just told you because you're trying. And
Yes.
it was a night and day experience, only a 4 month differential, but it was like two different people going to two different countries. It was a totally different thing.
Amazing, amazing. I love that. I love that. Um, what is the biggest mistake you see entrepreneurs make?
The biggest mistake that I see entrepreneurs make, I'm gonna say not trusting themselves enough, but at the same time putting too much reliance on the opinions of others. So what does that mean? That's like a really Those are two polar opposites. But the success I think comes on the in between. It comes in not being so overly invested in your own opinions and thoughts that you're blinded to everything else, but also not going so far to the public opinion that you don't create your own sense of originality of what you want to do and what you want to create. So it's absolutely a balancing act and an act in temperance where we as entrepreneurs need to know when to give up control, when to know when to pull others and so forth and get beyond what we think is kind of the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? But at the same time, not defaulting everything to be the decisions of others because then we lose control and we lose originality and we lose what makes us us from an entrepreneurial perspective. So that's what I would basically say, that the mistake comes with going too far one way or too far the other.
I love that. I love that. I love the balance there. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Cool. You had when we spoke, you had said that you would give away a copy of your book. Is that how can people get a copy of that?
Absolutely. So on my website, KareemKfuri.com, which you can put up or put in the comments here, there's a place where it says book. And right there, when you go there, there's a icon for the free ebook. And people can just click on it right there and they can download a free copy of the digital book. It's right there for anybody to do so. So again, KareemKfuri.com, first and last name. And then there's the place where it says book, and you'll be able to get a copy of the book there.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I'll put a link to that in your show notes so everybody can take advantage of that. Thank you so much on their behalf.
Sure.
Anything you want to share with the audience before we take off?
I mean, that keep a global mindset, keep a limitless mindset when it comes to entrepreneurship. That's definitely the way that you win in this world. And just mutual respect for each other. That's very, very important. We're in a time right now where there's a lot of insular thinking and a lot of activities that are happening that can divide us, not just as a nation, but as a globe. And we just need to work to understand how important we are to each other, and that if we do so, we'll be able to have the best outcomes for each other and then also for ourselves.
Thank you so much for being on the show. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. Me too. Thank you so much, Rick.
Oh, my pleasure. Folks, thank you so much for watching or listening to another episode of the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast. We will catch you next time.